Oh, good. This morning I couldn't get it to come on Facebook, and so I just gave up and we did it. And so I figured, well, if I can get it going at this time, then on Facebook, then I can upload it to YouTube as a recording. So YouTube's easier to upload to. It's harder on Facebook. So anyway, we're good to go. I'm sorry I have to sit down. I have vertigo. I'm not sure why. I've tried all the cures. Yes, all those cures that everybody's been brainstorming for me. Yes, I'm doing those things. So I had an adjustment yesterday, which I think actually worked, but it made me feel worse for about a day. But I am feeling better today, but I just don't want to get woozy. I get a little disoriented sometimes. My eyes start spinning around and the world starts going in circles. So I find that if I lean on the chair, then I'm a little more stable. So that's where I am. So good morning and welcome. It's good to see you today. We are in 1 Kings chapter 7 and 8. And last week we were marveling at the beauty and the majesty of the temple that Solomon was building, right? That he built. And so today we're going to go on from there. There's pumpkin bread back there, and I hope the coffee's hot. I tried to turn it back off and on again so it stays hot, so help yourself. I hope everybody found it. You found a comfortable spot back there? Hey, y'all, back there, you okay?
I'm fine.
I went and saw the room. It looks really good. The people, I don't know who is all doing the work on the room, but boy, it looks really great. And they're going to plug things in and get things put in place. The paint was finishing drying this week. So by next week, we should be good to go over in our regular spot. So that's going to be kind of fun. So anyway.
What size is that TV?
I think it's the 65-inch.
Also, the one in.
The only reason I say it's 65-inch is because it says it says Roku 65-inch, so I'm assuming that's. And ours is 70-inch, but it looks like about this size. But the room is so big, that the bigger TV. I think it's going to make the words bigger, which will be great. But it doesn't really look big in the room. It looks just like the right size for the room because it's a pretty wide room. So it really looks nice in there. It smells all clean, like paint.
The mice are all out.
What?
The mice are all out.
Oh, well, for a time. They tend to find their way back, so for now. Okay, so last week we were talking about the temple that Solomon built and how beautiful it was. And I was thinking about, we need to remember what they came from. Remember, this was the tabernacle. It was a portable structure that Moses got going, and in the center there you can see where the Holy of Holies is and where the inner sanctuary was, and then they had the outer courtyard. Did God tell anyone to build a temple?
No.
This was what God said. This is good enough right here. So did God say that we have to build this church?
No.
Does he mind that we do?
Don't think so.
For God, what's it all about?
Worship.
It's all about the worship, right? It's what's happening inside that church that's important, not the physical building of it. So we are so happy to have a building that we could use. I remember all the uses we were talking about when we were talking about building the structure. Well, we could do this, and if we had that, we could do this. And we had all these things we wanted to do. They aren't exactly the same as what we are doing. Over the years, things change, people change, and it kind of adjusts. But I remember us focusing on what we wanted to do. I also remember that we kept trying to make it smaller. But we couldn't make it smaller and still do all the things we wanted to do. So I felt good about the reason for the size of this church was for the big things we wanted to do. And we needed the space to do it. And maybe some of those things weren't practical. Maybe they weren't things that came out to be true. It doesn't matter. I just remember the intention of our hearts was to build a place that we could use. So how about this place? The one Solomon built. What about it? Was it built for being used? Yes.
Sure.
But it was also built for what else?
His glory.
The gold, all the stone. I mean, it's really fancy stuff put in there. And he keeps talking about wanting to honor God. But do you remember anything about God having a giant bowl with bulls holding it up?
No.
You remember anything about God saying things need to be coated with gold and have ornaments and pomegranates and orchids all around out of gold? None of that, right?
There
So,
were instructions on some less elaborate things when the tabernacle was
Yes.
designed and ordained by God. And
And-
they did involve gold.
The lamps and the mercy seat.
Yeah.
there were things that were meant to be special items, yes, and they had special, anything like this, more like this,
Yeah.
with certain implements and tools being very specific for their purpose. Uh-huh. Yeah. I don't see any big bowl with the bulls underneath it. Do you see any of that
No,
kind of
no.
stuff? No. But is there anything wrong with that? There's nothing necessarily wrong with making it fancy, is what I'm trying to
No.
say. But Solomon is getting a little off kilter here, and we're going to see more of that in the next chapter.
But couldn't like the cost of all that be diverted to something more in line with God's plan?
Potentially. Also, how did they afford the cost of all of it? They sinned. They did what God told them not to do. So we need to consider that too. So let's take a look at it in chapter 7, verse 1. It took Solomon 13 years, however, to complete the construction of his palace. So remember in chapter 6, he completed construction of the temple. And so now he starts building the palace, and his palace takes 13 years. So altogether, how long was this construction going on? 20 years. How long is Solomon king? 40. So half of his reign, he's been building these huge structures. The first one, the temple, which we saw in last chapter how magnificent it was, but it only took 7 years. Now he spends 13 years on his palace. Now in this next chapter, it goes halfway describing the palace, and the other half it describes more of the implements and tools that were put in into the sanctuary. So it's going to get a little mixed here. I don't know that they overlapped construction between the temple and the palace, but it appears that once they finished the major work on the temple, they were still working on some of the implements and the tools that would go into that temple as they began construction on the palace. That's what it appears like to me, like in a way they overlapped a little bit in the work. So chapter 7, verse 1, it took him 13 years to complete construction of his palace. He built the palace of the forest of Lebanon. I just about fell over when I read this. I didn't realize that the palace wasn't like right beside the temple. In my head, there was like a sidewalk, and the temple was here, and you walk on the sidewalk, and there's the palace. I don't know why it was, but this says that the palace was put in the forest of Lebanon.
I don't think I think they used the cedar logs from Lebanon in the construction, just like they did in the temple.
Then you would be one of those scholars who would argue about this. The argument is that the palace was over in the forest. It was like he had several palaces. There was a retreat palace in the forest and other places that he's going to list later that he builds. And that this one that they're talking about is one that was built in the forest of Lebanon, up where they were cutting the wood from.
Okay, well.
But I don't know if that's true, Marvin.
Well,
and there's argument among the scholars about that. And we're going to see.
The translation I'm reading says it was built of the forest of Lebanon, not in.
Mhm. And that's the argument the scholars are having, is in the actual language.
Okay.
And later they're going to talk about other buildings, and they're not really sure if those are separate buildings or if it's all one big palace complex. And so the potential, those people that are arguing about where the palace is, they were thinking, well, perhaps the one building is over there in the forest of Lebanon. Isn't that interesting? I didn't know that.
Well, in and of totally changes.
Yes,
Yeah,
it does.
They can mean
Yeah.
the same, they can mean the same thing.
Yep.
Laura,
Yes.
in 1 Kings 10:17, it says, "And the king put them in the house of the forest of Lebanon."
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep. We'll see. We'll go. It's verse 17.
And then 21 says the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So the scholars argue. So you're among many scholars if you have an argument about that, because they go back and forth about the exact meaning of that. I was shocked. I don't know why. I just thought the way it was described, like, okay, they built the temple, then they made a little gold sidewalk, probably, you know, over to the palace, and there was a big, like a great big palace complex. We're going to see another depiction on the actual mount that also makes me tend to think that was all one piece. Verse 3. It was roofed with cedar above the beams that rested on the columns, 45 beams, 15 to a row. They say that is saying that there were probably 3 levels above the ground level. So there was a main hall at ground level, and then these beams that they're talking about were the floor and the roof for the other 3 levels above it. So his palace had multiple levels. All the doorways had rectangular frames. They were in the front part in sets of 3 facing each other. And notice the dimensions of the palace. This size of this palace is about 3 times as large as the temple. It took twice as long to build, 13 years to build, took 7 years to build the temple, and took twice as long to build. Verse 6, he made a colonnade, 50 cubits long and 30 wide. In front of it was a portico, and in front of that were pillars and an overhanging roof. He built the throne hall, the hall of justice where he was to judge, and he covered the cedar from floor to ceiling, and the palace in which he was to live, set farther back, was similar in design. Solomon also made a palace that like this hall for Pharaoh's daughter whom he had married. So the big debate is, are those 4 separate structures, potentially even in different places? Or are those rooms or sections of this huge palace complex that he made? Jerusalem is so built over. So many people groups have come into Jerusalem and built, destroyed and built over, destroyed and built over. They can't dig to even find out. They don't know, and they can't dig because you'd have to go through historical layers that are embattled. There are other groups that don't want you to be digging up their precious place. And so Jerusalem has been so resided in so long, and there's so many layers from destruction and rebuilding that the scholars really can't even prove any of these things because they can't dig it up. The colonnade that's described here was thought to be the entrance hall to the palace, and its length is thought to be the full width of the palace. We aren't sure if in verse 7 those are separate rooms from the throne hall, hall of justice. Are those separate from the living quarters? And are they separate from the Pharaoh's daughter's palace? And we're not sure about the location. If they were all right there in Jerusalem, or were these buildings in different places in Jerusalem, perhaps even one in the forest of Lebanon.
Okay.
So we know less than we do know. Verse 9, all these structures from the outside to the great courtyard and from foundation to eaves were made of blocks of high-grade stone, cut to size and smoothed on their inner and outer faces. The foundations were laid with large stones of good quality, some measuring 10 cubits and some 8. Remember, cubits is you take that much at a half. So if it says 10, you can say that's 15 feet. So that's the way you can think of it. So if it's 8, you can say, well, that would be 12 feet. You can translate it that way. Let's see. The foundations were laid with large stones of good quality, some measuring 10 cubits and some 8. Above were high-grade stones cut to size and cedar beams. The great courtyard was surrounded by a wall of 3 courses of dressed stone and 1 course of trimmed cedar beams, as was the inner courtyard of the temple of the Lord with its portico. Now see, now they're going back and referring to the temple. And so it gets really confusing here. And where's this portico? Where's the temple of the Lord with its portico? Where's that? We didn't see that on that drawing we saw last week because there's debate about whether there was a little roof between the building and those columns in the front. I'll show it to you when we get there. I want to let you know that I thought it was interesting that they said that the limestone in the Holy Land was a pinkish white. And I've seen that before. Have you? Pictures of stone that's kind of a pinkish white color? So this limestone is a pinkish white limestone. It's easily cut. Originally, when you quarry it, it's easy to cut, but it gradually hardens with exposure. I didn't know that. I thought that was interesting. And the courtyard is constructed the same way as the inner courtyard of the temple. This description fits the description of how the temple had its courtyard constructed. So it's the same construction, just about 2 to 3 times bigger. Everything Solomon made for himself was 2 to 3 times bigger than the temple. 1Kings7:13. King Solomon went to Tyre and brought Hiram, whose mother was a widow from the tribe of Naphtali, and whose father was born Tyre and a skilled craftsman in bronze. Hiram was filled with wisdom, with understanding, and with knowledge to do all kinds of bronze work. He came to King Solomon and did all the work assigned to him. So this guy Hiram, I'm going to read to you from 2 Chronicles where it talks more about him. But he was an important part in completing the construction, and that might be why this is kind of mixed up, because they're going to be talking about all of the artwork that he did and the stonework that he did. He was very much a specialist and a well-known craftsman of the time. So in 2 Chronicles, I'm going to skip through verses here in the chapter 2 of 2 Chronicles, but just to give you an idea of who this Hiram guy is. Solomon sent this message to Hiram, king of Tyre. Send me cedar logs as you did for my father David when you sent him cedar to build a palace to live in. Now I am about to build a temple. Verse 7. Send me therefore a man skilled to work in gold and silver, bronze and iron, and in purple, crimson, and blue yarn, and experienced in the art of engraving, to work in Judah and Jerusalem with my skilled workers whom my father David provided. There's another hint. He's working in Judah and Jerusalem. So that also makes you think maybe the palaces are in different areas, maybe than just right around the temple. And isn't it interesting? He's looking for one person who can work both with bronze and iron, yarn, and engraving, and stone. I mean, how this is a very particular artist that they're looking for here.
An early handyman.
Yeah. Verse 13. I am sending you Huram Abi, a man of great skill, whose mother was from Dan. Why would they mention that? Jewish. Mm-hmm. Mother from Dan, and whose father was from Tyre. So just so you know, he is trained to work in gold and silver, bronze and iron, stone and wood, and with purple and blue and crimson yarn and fine linen. He is experienced in all kinds of engraving and can execute any design given to him. He will work with your skilled workers and with those of my lord David your father. Verse 17. Solomon took a census of all the foreigners residing in Israel. Why is he doing that? After the census his father David had taken, and they were found to be 153,600. He assigned 70,000 of them to be carriers, and 80,000 to be stonecutters in the hills, with 3,600 foremen over them to keep the people working.
Slavery.
Yes.
Big code.
Yes. And who are they making slaves?
Not the Israelis.
But the people living in the land with the Israelis. Right. They're foreigners, but they're living in Jerusalem and in that surrounding area. So they took a census to find out who they were allowed to, under the law, to put to slave labor, because technically God said it was okay if they took those foreigners. But is this when they're supposed to be doing it? After all these years of already gaining the land? That was what he told them when they first were going into the land. The people could leave. Some of the people, if they didn't leave, they were going to be killed. And other people were given a choice to stay and work for them. Right? Remember that when they first went into the land in Deuteronomy, or where we read that at?
But that's been several generations ago.
That's been a while ago.
Yeah.
Vern.
I thought he told him not to take the census.
He got mad at David for taking a census, right?
Yeah.
This is not good, but it's not unlike Solomon. What do we see from Solomon from the very beginning?
Selfishness.
He's making some mixed decisions, isn't he? Like, remember when he offered a sacrifice to God on the high place? well, that's where everybody offers it right now because there's not really a good place for it. You know, this is where everyone's used to going, you know, when they offer to Chemosh and Molech. But we're not doing it on that. We're doing it over here. Remember that? There have been, how many wives are we talking about here? Yeah, how many wives does God say? One. That's enough. That'll give you enough trouble, right? One's enough. Right. He has 700 wives and 300 concubines. Concubines are nowhere on the list. And after the first wife, the other 699 are not on the list. But what did Solomon do? Was he taking good care of his wives? Yes.
Probably.
They were happy to be his wife. And why was he happy to have multiple wives? Alliances. He made alliances with all the nations around. You know, if your daughter's married to the king of that country and he gives her a little palace to live in, you know, you got to do right by him.
Well, and he would not have been able to organize and do all this construction had he not enjoyed a time of peace with his neighbors. And if he'd had to be out fighting wars and fending off the attackers, this couldn't have happened. And David kind of set him up for that, but God blessed him that way that he had this relatively tranquil time as far as wars.
The thing is with Solomon is that the things he's doing are not exactly right. They're a little off. Which, darn it, if we aren't the same way.
Yeah.
Don't we make excuses for things? We
No.
watch something on television that we know is not appropriate for us to watch. We know it.
I can always justify it.
I know. And that's the way Solomon is doing. He's always finding a reason to go off course. And we do the same thing. And we act like it's no big deal. And that's what Solomon is thinking. It's no big deal. Well, so we have to get some, I'm almost done. I built this great temple and I got to get this done. And we're just about done with the palace. It'll just be a little bit longer. We need more people to work on it, right? It's like something that takes over and pretty soon it's so big and blown out, you don't even recognize what it was from the beginning. And that's exactly what happens to us. We need to learn the lessons from Solomon because we are exactly that same way. We allow this little thing that we know is not quite right, but we allow it. And then we let it grow and grow and grow until pretty soon it's controlling our life. How about those of us who have trouble with our weight? So what? I had a piece of pie. So what? I had a scoop of ice cream. Then every day it's a pie and ice cream. And then it's twice a day, and then it's 3 times a day. And pretty soon I'm out like this. And then I can't walk or move. I have a heart attack or whatever. Right? Whatever. The point is that we allow these little things. It's true, that little thing is not that big a deal. But we allow it, and then it grows and grows and takes ownership in our life. It could be a way of thinking. Maybe we have a way of thinking jealously. Like you're always looking at other people and thinking they have it better than you. Instead of being happy with what God has given you. Instead of enjoying the blessings that God has brought into your life. Maybe you find yourself enjoying sharing little secrets with people. Oh, so-and-so said, did you hear? Right? We have all these little things that we consider just little buggers. Just little things. But with time, they grow and they become evil and negative and bad. So we need to fix them from the beginning. Let's not let the little things start. Let's not be Solomon. He could have done great things. He ended up having terrible tragedy at the end of his life, and he could have done great things. He could have done much better than he did. It might not have included big palaces. It might not have included such a fancy tabernacle. If you make this big old thing like this, isn't that just like say, come get me, come get my gold? It's right over here. All you who want to attack, come on, right? Come and get it.
Wasn't he kind of like buying his way into God, trying to?
I don't know. Maybe it was. We don't know his motive. He seemed to have a good motive, sort of, but he just seemed to keep getting off track. So I'm not really sure.
And he wasn't a fighting man, never was.
It'd be interesting to talk with him to know.
But David made provisions for the building of the temple, and he left on hand tons and tons of silver and gold
And the timbers
and,
everything.
and timbers and stuff like that.
Yeah, no one's complaining about Solomon building that temple. The Jews, that was really a point of pride, and it really pulled them together as a country. And you're right, David had gathered all of that material and made all the plans. So don't you think that's the tricky part, though? At what point does it become wrong?
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing wrong with me having a piece of pie or a scoop of ice cream, right? But the problem is in the excess. And that seems to be where we're going with Solomon. It seems like his problem is in excess and in not doing things exactly the way God has said. He kind of takes some liberty. Later on, he takes more liberty. So let's see where we go. Chapter 7, verse 15. He cast 2 bronze pillars, each 18 cubits high and 12 cubits in circumference. Okay, look at the picture. See these right here? Those right there. And then the big debate the scholars have is, was there a roof or some sort of tarp that went over from the building out over these to make like a portico, like an entranceway? They argue about that, but there's no proof either way. So, verse 16, he also made 2 capitals. That means like the top of the pillars. They call them capitals. 5 cubits high, a network of interwoven chains adorned the capitals on top of the pillars, 7 for each capital. He made pomegranates in 2 rows, encircling each network to decorate the capitals on top of the pillars. He did the same for each capital. The capitals on top of the pillars of the portico were in the shape of lilies, 4 cubits high. On the capitals of both pillars, above the bowl-shaped part next to the network, were the 200 pomegranates in rows all around. He erected the pillars at the portico of the temple. The pillar to the south he named Jachim, and the one to the north Boaz. The capitals on top were in the shape of lilies, and so the work on the pillars was completed. Does anybody remember the meaning of the names Jachim and Boaz? Do you have it in your study Bible there? I don't have mine.
Boaz was
Well established?
an ancestor of David, I believe.
Yeah, but his name means something. Is it well?
Jan means well established, and Boaz means is in
Fleetness.
In him we find strength, and Jam was
Well established.
well established. So they named the pillars well established, and in him we find strength. The capitals on top were shaped like lilies. Lilies, pomegranates, those things were considered Garden of Eden's type stuff. Really, the kinds of things you would have found in Garden of Eden. So, and they were used in other artwork of the time, other beliefs and other systems, other artwork of the time was considered a richness of, a great, a Garden of Eden type thing. Okay, so now, do you look in the front, you see that bowl with the bulls underneath it. That's what they call the sea of cast metal. Now, do you remember that over here? See a sea of cast metal anywhere?
No.
Do you see, there looks like there's a little bit of a bowl, like
What's
up
that?
here with maybe some
Kind of
water.
bowl between the altar with the fire and the actual tent.
Yeah. Yeah, why would they need water?
For cleansing.
The ceremonial washing.
Yeah.
All kinds of reasons, right? Because they're dealing with a lot of animal fluids and stuff. They're going to be rinsing and washing and all kinds of things. So they do have a need for water. So in this case, if you look at this picture also, there's a second container. Do you see these containers down here? And they're kind of like bowls with wheels on them. So you could take water out of this container and into those. And we spent quite a bit of time talking this morning about whether they had a little spigot at the bottom of that bowl and get the water out. Or maybe they had to put the tube over and you had to suck it, you get it started down. We don't know any of that, but verse 23, he made the sea of cast metal circular in shape, measuring 10 cubits from rim to rim, so 15 feet from rim to rim, and 5 cubits high, so 7.5 feet high. Let's see, 5 cubits. It took a line of 30 cubits to measure around it. Below the rim, gourds encircled it, 10 to a cubit. The gourds were cast into 2 rows in one piece with the sea. The sea stood on 12 bulls. 3 facing north, 3 facing west, 3 facing south, and 3 facing east. The sea rested on top of them, and their hindquarters were toward the center. It was a handbreadth in thickness, and its rim was like the rim of a cup, like a lily blossom. It held 2,000 baths, which is about 10,000 gallons of water. Now, this kind of thing was common among Eastern temples. And the symbolism that was used in these other temples is the water, the sea that's there is meant to be the uncontrollable chaos that the strong bulls, our God is like a strong bull who controls the sea, is the vision of it. But it applied to multiple different gods. Whoever built it applied it to their God. So we see the same symbol in other places with other gods. Solomon. I don't think David described this sea bowl with, right? Then he added something.
Yeah, probably so.
An added feature. So this was true in the Canaanite and Israelite cultures, reflecting that God controls chaos. Now the movable tubs, see those in the bottom? The next part's going to describe those rolling or movable tubs. He also made 10 movable stands of bronze. Each was 4 cubits long, so 6 feet long, 4 wide and 3 high. This is how the stands were made. They had side panels attached to uprights. On the panels between the uprights were lions, bulls, and cherubim, and on the uprights as well. Above and below the lions and bulls were wreaths of hammered work. Each stand had 4 bronze wheels with bronze axles, and each had a basin resting on 4 supports, cast with wreaths on each side. On the inside of the stand there was an opening that had a circular frame 1 cubit deep. This opening was round, and with its base work it measured 1.5 cubits. Around its opening there was an engraving. The panels of the stands were square, not round. The 4 wheels were under the panels, and the axles of the wheels were attached to the stand. The diameter of each wheel was 1.5 cubits. The wheels were made like chariot wheels. The axles, rims, spokes, and hubs were all of cast metal. So because these were meant to be moved, that would be a way for you to transport water or other stuff around in the courtyard area. And there's a lot of detail in this description. There have been some archaeologists in Cyprus that uncovered an almost precise parallel of this description, complete with the 4-wheel design, cherubs, and floral fauna ornamentation. So they have found something similar to this. Yeah. I wonder if, like, someday, like, if we were not going to be, taken up at any moment, I wonder if in 1,000 years someone would dig up coffee makers and go, what are these mysterious objects? And why? Look how they move like this and like that, And then they'll dig up a Keurig and go, oh, what? I don't know. Or a phone, yeah. 1Kings7:34. Each stand had 4 handles, 1 on each corner, projecting from the stand. At the top of the stand there was a circular band 1/2 cubit deep. The supports and panels were attached to the top of the stand. He engraved cherubim, lions, and palm trees on the surface of the supports and the panels in every available space with wreaths all around. This is the way he made the 10 stands. They were all cast in the same molds and were identical in size and shape. So it's again mimicking the Garden of Eden. There is a wall mural in Mari. It's a palace in Mesopotamia, and that palace predates the Jerusalem temple by about 1,000 years, and that has the same kind of visual imaging of the pomegranates and the artwork, same kind of artwork. Just in case you needed to know. So there's our artist rendering of the first temple. It looks something like that.
Reasoning why Solomon did all this?
Well, he's going to talk about it in the next chapter, so I'll let him tell you. Well, David is the one who did everything for the temple, prescribed everything for the temple, so he would have been more about the palace than the temple anyway. Yeah. Verse 38. He then made 10 bronze basins, each holding 40 baths and measuring 4 cubits across, one basin to go on each of the 10 stands. He placed 5 of the stands on the south side of the temple and 5 on the north. He placed the sea on the south side at the southeast corner of the temple. He also made the pots and shovels and sprinkling bowls. So Hiram finished all the work he had undertaken for King Solomon in the temple of the Lord. The 2 pillars, the 2 bowl-shaped capitals on top of the pillars, the 2 sets of network decorating the 2 bowl-shaped capitals on top of the pillars, the 400 pomegranates. I'd be so tired of making pomegranates. Even if you've done crochet, after a while you're going, another one? For the 2 sets of network, 2 rows of pomegranates for each network decorating the bowl-shaped capitals on top of the pillars. The 10 stands with their 10 basins, the sea and the 12 bowls under it, the pots, the shovels, and the sprinkling bowls.
It's paid well.
All these objects that Hiram made for King Solomon for the temple of the Lord were of burnished bronze. The king had them cast in clay molds in the plain of the Jordan between Succoth and Zarethan. Solomon left all these things unweighed because there were so many. The weight of the bronze was not determined. Solomon also made all the furnishings that were in the Lord's temple: the golden altar, the golden table on which was the bread of presence, the lampstands of pure gold, 5 on the right and 5 on the left in front of the inner sanctuary, the gold floral work and lamps and tongs, the pure gold basins, wick trimmers, sprinkling bowls, dishes and censers, and the gold sockets for the doors of the innermost room, the most holy place, and also for the doors of the main hall of the temple. When all the work King Solomon had done for the temple of the Lord was finished, he brought in the things his father David had dedicated, the silver and gold and the furnishings, and he placed them in the treasuries of the Lord's temple. So Succoth and Zarethan are located in the Jordan Valley north of the Dead Sea near Jabbok Canyon. Some scholars have found traces of metal smelting in that area. And so it seems to have been an area that was used for metal mining and processing in that area. This is an artist's rendition of Jerusalem at the time of Solomon, viewed from the southeast, and it shows Solomon's palace and the temple in the top right corner. The double gateway in the center is by the Gihon Spring. But this is an artist's rendering because we're really not very sure exactly where his palace was in relation to the temple. And we're not sure if those buildings were 4 separate buildings or one like pieces of his one palace complex. That's unsure. But you can see the mount there, how Jerusalem kind of is up on the mount, and that's where the temple was, at the top of the mount. They said that most of the city has not been unearthed. Most of the things that we are reported to in Jerusalem have not been proven or unearthed because of the many generations that have lived there over time. You can't dig through somebody's house to get to where you think maybe there might be. Okay, chapter 8. Then King Solomon summoned into his presence at Jerusalem the elders of Israel, all the heads of the tribes and the chiefs and the Israelite families, to bring up the ark of the Lord's covenant from Zion, the city of David. Now, didn't we read that he had to go to Gibeon to give sacrifices because that's where the ark was? I did not realize that the ark was in a different place than the tabernacle and the altar.
Okay, I thought Zion referred to Jerusalem. The city of David Jerusalem was called the city of David.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Well, it's a portion of Jerusalem. It's
Okay.
as like a suburb of, just like Gibeon is only 3 miles from Jerusalem.
Okay.
But remember he went to Gibeon because that's where the I thought it was the ark, but now when I found out it was the altar was there. Solomon went to Gibeon because the altar was there. The ark was taken by David to the house of Obed-Edom in Jerusalem. Remember the Gibeonites tricked Joshua and Israel into a peace treaty at the time of the conquest of Canaan. And the city was given to remember they're the ones who brought the moldy cheese and stuff and tricked them. And so David David avenged Saul's violation of the Gibeonite treaty by the execution of 7 of Saul's descendants, and that was at that most high place. The reason for Gibeon's importance was the presence there of the tabernacle and the altar of burnt offering. These must have been salvaged after the destruction of Shiloh by the Philistines. So David had the Ark of the Covenant in Jerusalem at the city of David, and Gibeon was 3.5 miles north of Jerusalem, and that's where the altar and assuming the tabernacle with it were at. So things were kind of scattered about. And what was in the ark?
I don't know, but I wouldn't want to move it.
You saw the movie? You saw the movie, what happens when you open it up?
Right, right. Ten Commandments,
Dismissed.
Aaron's rod,
Yeah.
a jar of
Manna.
manna.
But now what's in it? The only thing left in it now is the 10 Commandments. When the Gibeonites took it, we don't know who, somewhere in there, took out the golden goblet that had the manna and the stick. They probably said, a stick? What's this for?
It is budded.
Yeah. So, chapter 8, verse 6. The priest then brought the ark of the Lord's covenant to its place in the inner sanctuary of the temple, the most holy place, and put it beneath the wings of the cherubim. The cherubim spread their wings over the place of the ark and overshadowed the ark and its carrying poles. These poles were so long that their ends could be seen from the holy place in front of the inner sanctuary, but not from the outside the holy place. And they are still there today. So when the people wrote this, that was still there. There was nothing in the ark except the 2 stone tablets that Moses had placed in it at Horeb, where the Lord made a covenant with the Israelites after they came out of Egypt. When the priests withdrew from the holy place, the cloud filled the temple of the Lord, and the priests could not perform their service because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled his temple. Remember when we talked about the pillar of cloud and fire that left with the children out of the people out of Egypt and stayed with them and stayed over that? And when they did the tabernacle and all that, it stayed right over it. Whenever Moses was talking to God, the pillar of cloud and fire was there. Whenever they would go to gather whatever out of the desert, they could always find their way back because they could see the pillar of cloud and fire over the tabernacle. That has stayed with them. And now we see that visible manifestation of the presence of the Lord descended here on this tabernacle, on this temple. In Ezekiel, we're going to see the presence of the Lord leave because of the disobedience of the children of Israel. Just before they're captured by the Babylonians and hauled off, the pillar of cloud and fire leaves them. So this time it's coming to them. Verse 12, Then Solomon said, The Lord has said that he would dwell in a dark cloud. I have indeed built a magnificent temple for you, a place for you to dwell forever. Oh, I've done a good job here, because now you got a place for your little cloud to go. While the whole assembly of Israel was standing there, the king turned around and blessed them. Then he said, Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who with his own hand has fulfilled what he promised with his own mouth to my father David. For he said, Since the day I brought my people Israel out of Egypt, I have not chosen a city in any tribe of Israel to have a temple built, so that my name might be there. But I have chosen David to rule my people Israel. That promise was in 2 Samuel chapter 7. Let's go on to verse 17. My father David had it in his heart to build a temple for the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. But the Lord said to my father David, You did well to have it in your heart to build a temple for my name. Nevertheless, you are not the one to build the temple, but your son, your own flesh and blood, he is the one who will build the temple for my name. The Lord has kept the promise he made. I have succeeded David my father, and now I sit on the throne of Israel, just as the Lord promised, and I have built the temple for the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. I have provided a place there for the ark, in which is the covenant of the Lord that he made with our ancestors when he brought them out of Egypt. Then Solomon stood before the altar of the Lord in front of the whole assembly of Israel, spread out his hands towards heaven and said, Lord, the God of Israel, there is no God like you in heaven above or on earth below. You who keep your covenant of love with your servants who continue wholeheartedly in your way. Oh, Solomon, you have kept your promises to your servant David my father. With your mouth you have promised, and with your hand you have fulfilled it, as it is today. Now, Lord, the God of Israel, keep your servant David my father, the promises you made to him when you said, you shall never fail to have a successor to sit before me on the throne of Israel. If only your descendants are careful in all they do to walk before me faithfully as you have done. Isn't it ironic that he would quote the very passage that applies to him? And now, God of Israel, let your word that you promised your servant David my father come true. But will God really dwell on earth? The heavens, even the highest heaven, cannot contain you. How much less this temple I have built? Yet give attention to your servant's prayer and his plea for mercy, Lord my God. Hear the cry and the prayer that your servant is praying in your presence this day. May your eyes be open toward this temple night and day, this place of which you said, my name shall be there, so that you will hear the prayer your servant prays toward this place. Hear the supplication of your servant and of your people Israel when they pray toward this place. Hear from heaven your dwelling place, and when you hear, forgive. Now, is that an idea, a concept that we understand? That you're going to pray toward a place?
Not really.
Not as much, huh? But what do we do? What are the kinds of things we do that we think symbolic or help us to pray? I've seen people put their hands up and they'll pray. Sometimes they'll lift their head up like this. Other people fold their hands and they're down, right? Mm-hmm. Is there anything wrong with looking toward, I don't know where Jerusalem is from here. If you were in that, would you face that way? Yeah. So would there be anything wrong with that? It's just the symbolism. And that's the whole point of having a place for God's name to dwell. God doesn't really need a house to live in. But it's the symbolism of it that is helpful to us sometimes, especially when we're most distraught and having a difficult time. We can be helped by that. In Catholicism, they'll hold the cross and it has the little rosary beads, right? But for many people who do that practice, it's just like this symbol. It's a symbol. It draws your attention, your focus to what you're doing to your prayer. So there's all kinds of ways it can be done. But this was the symbol here, was to face that way and to pray toward the temple. And that would make you feel like you're talking toward where God is, where his name is at.
Daniel was obedient to that.
Pardon?
Daniel was obedient to that. And they caught him, of course, praying towards the...
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we hear it today. Mm-hmm. Verse 31, when anyone wrongs their neighbor and is required to take an oath, and they come and swear the oath before your altar in this temple, then hear from heaven and act. Judge between your servants, condemning the guilty by bringing down on their heads what they have done, and vindicating the innocent by treating them in accordance with their innocence. When your people Israel have been defeated by an enemy because they have sinned against you, and when they turn back to you and give praise to your name, praying and making supplication to you in this temple, then hear from heaven and forgive the sin of your people Israel and bring them back to the land you gave to their ancestors. It's not saying that this is a magic place and if you pray here, everything will happen. It's saying this is a symbol, a physical place that you can feel and touch, and this will bring your attention to who God is and what he can do. It's a great speech he's making. When the heavens are shut up and there is no rain because your people have sinned. Now, by the way, drought was another one of the covenant curses. If you look at Deuteronomy 28, 22 to 24, you're going to see several of the plagues, drought, different things that could happen as curses under the covenant. So when he starts mentioning these things, he's saying that if bad things happen because we've broken the covenant, in this case, if you have drought, and you pray toward this place and give praise to your name and turn from their sin because they have afflicted them, then hear from heaven and forgive the sin of your servants, your people Israel. Teach them the right way to live and send rain on the land you gave your people for an inheritance. When famine or plague, again, comes to the land, or blight or mildew, locusts or grasshoppers, or when an enemy besieges them in any of their cities, whatever disaster or disease may come, and when a prayer or plea is made by anyone among your people Israel, being aware of the afflictions of their own hearts and spreading out their hands toward this temple, then hear from heaven your dwelling place, forgive and act. Deal with everyone according to all they do, since you know their hearts. For you alone know every human heart, so that they will fear you all the time they live in the land you gave our ancestors. Fear is not fear like, ooh, it's fear like reverence and awe, understanding the power of God. As for the foreigner, so that's us, and most of us, unless you're a Jewish heritage, who does not belong to your people Israel, but has come from a distant land because of your name. For they will hear of your great name and your mighty hand and your outstretched arm when they come and pray toward this temple. Then hear from heaven your dwelling place. Do whatever the foreigner asks of you, so that all the peoples of the earth may know your name and fear you, as do your own people Israel, and may know that this house I have built bears your name. So that includes us foreigners. It also includes the foreigners that he enslaved to do the work, by the way. 1Kings 8:44, when your people go to war against their enemies, wherever you send them, and when they pray to the Lord toward the city you've chosen and the temple I built for your name, then hear from heaven their prayer and their plea and uphold their cause. When they sin against you, for there's no one who does not sin, and you become angry with them and give them over to their enemies who take them captive to their own lands far away or near, and if they have a change of heart in the land where they are held captive and repent and plead with you in the land of their captors and say, we have sinned, we have done wrong, we have acted wickedly, and if they turn back to you with all their heart and soul in the land of their enemies who took them captive and pray to you toward the land you gave their ancestors, toward the city you have chosen and the temple I have built for your name, then from heaven, your dwelling place, hear their prayer and their plea and uphold their cause, and forgive your people who have sinned against you. Forgive all the offenses they have committed against you, and cause their captors to show them mercy. For they are your people and your inheritance, whom you brought out of Egypt, out of that iron smelting furnace. That was how Egypt was described in Deuteronomy 4:20 as an iron smelting furnace. Do you feel like the Jews had this happen with them? They were cast all over out of Jerusalem, and then they were gathered back to their land. This is the passage that they quote about that, about being gathered back to Israel. May your eyes be open to your servants' plea and to the plea of your people Israel, and may you listen to them whenever they cry out to you. For you singled them out from all the nations of the world to be your own inheritance, just as you declared through your servant Moses, when you, sovereign Lord, brought our ancestors out of Egypt. Oh, boy, Solomon. When Solomon had finished all these prayers and supplications to the Lord, he rose from before the altar of the Lord, where he had been kneeling with his hands spread out toward heaven. He stood and blessed the whole assembly of Israel in a loud voice, saying, Praise be to the Lord, who has given rest to his people Israel, just as he promised. Not one word has failed of all the good promises he gave through his servant Moses. May the Lord our God be with us as he was with our ancestors. May he never leave us nor forsake us. May he turn our hearts to him, to walk in obedience to him and keep the commands, decrees, and laws he gave our ancestors. And may these words of mine, which I have prayed before the Lord, be near to the Lord our God day and night, that he may uphold the cause of his servant and the cause of his people Israel, according to each day's need, so that all peoples of the earth may know that the Lord is God and that there is no other. And may your hearts be fully committed to the Lord our God, to live by his decrees and obey his commands, as at this time. It was a good day for making speeches. He made a big old long one. Then the king and all Israel with him offered sacrifices before the Lord. Solomon offered a sacrifice of fellowship offerings to the Lord, 22,000 cattle and 120,000 sheep and goats. So the king and all the Israelites dedicated the temple of the Lord. On that same day, the king consecrated the middle part of the courtyard in front of the temple of the Lord. And there he offered burnt offerings, grain offerings, and the fat of the fellowship offerings, because the bronze altar that stood before the Lord was too small to hold the burnt offerings, the grain offerings, and the fat of the fellowship offerings. So Solomon observed the festival at that time, and all Israel with him, a vast assembly, people from Lebo Hamath to the Wadi of Egypt. They celebrated it before the Lord our God for 7 days and 7 days more, 14 days in all. On the following day, he sent the people away. They blessed the king and then went home, joyful and glad in heart, for all the good things the Lord had done for his servant David and his people Israel. So people came from all over the place to Jerusalem for this celebration. They did 7 days of this celebration, and then they said 7 more. They think that was the Feast of Tabernacles. So you have the dedication of the temple for 7 days, and then the Festival of the Tabernacles the next 7 days. That would match the time of year that it was done. So according to Chronicles, there was a final assembly at the end of that last day again before they went back to their homes. So that's some kind of celebration.
Yeah, 22,000.
Yeah. So what do you think about Solomon and his temple? 20 years to do the temple, and then his palaces took another 13 years. What do you think?
We raise taxes, that's for sure.
It's extravagant.
Mm-hmm. What do you think? Is he a good man, a good king, or a bad king?
He did it well.
The first part,
Part? Some?
like, there comes a point where he kind of departs from the Lord and starts worshiping idols and other
Mm-hmm.
things.
Yeah, we're about to turn that at the next chapter.
I was gonna say, that's the next phase.
That's the next chapter.
Makes a lot of bowls.
But we see where he's gone, where he's going, right? And the problem is we can see where that leads. And we know where that leads. And he's getting grandiose, and he's trying to do everything he can to afford that. So he's doing more slavery, more conscripted labor. It's going to create problems among the people. And then to what end? When's it enough? I mean, 701 wives? How many more? How many? And what do we?
No, 700, and then you switch to adding concubines, no more.
Oh, that's at 700, and then how many more concubines, right? It's very excessive. He just goes on and on. It's very excessive. And where's the limit of that?
He's gearing up to write Ecclesiastes.
Which is,
All is vanity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and David's known for,
All that was for nothing.
Vanity.
the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want.
David.
He maketh me to lay down in green pastures, right? And Solomon, the one who built this temple and all these, and basically built a kingdom, so it really was an established kingdom. David established it and secured it, but Solomon really has made it a world place.
Yeah.
But then where's the end of that? One
Well-
excess leads to the next excess.
Driving after the
He doesn't give
Lord.
gratitude to the Lord.
Yeah. After Solomon's death, the kingdom gets split and things start degrading, and
And how did Solomon feel at the end of his time? Meaningless. Everything is meaningless.
Yes, yes.
Look where we are today.
Where?
Same thing.
In what
More
way?
and more. Bigger is better.
At some point, you have to learn to be satisfied.
How much is enough?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what
Do you-
Ecclesiastes says it.
Do you think there are any parallels between these events of Solomon and some of us have visited parts of Europe, and if you go to France and a few of the other countries, almost every old city that's a medium to large city has a big Gothic cathedral that's just huge and extravagant and stained glass and big tall columns and all this stuff. And for the most part, you know, they're incredible and huge and nice, wonderful to visit and look at and admire the architecture and how long they've remained. And they still have worship going on in them, but the worship attenders seem to be few for the stature of the building and for the size of the city.
We have that in, I was just a couple years ago, talking to a minister of a church in downtown Phoenix area where they just had nobody coming to church. A really nice facility and no one coming. And there were some groups like AA groups and stuff using the facility, but they didn't really have a church. They had nobody coming to church.
Yeah.
They couldn't keep the church going.
Look at the money they spent on Notre Dame rebuilding that for the size of the congregation.
Yeah, I think that event with that fire really focused an awareness of some of those things to people around the world as far as the magnitude of those buildings.
So we know from the scripture what Jesus wanted us to do. And did he say to build great big buildings?
Go in your closet.
What does Jesus tell us to do, though? Okay, so good bonus point, we're not building big cathedrals. But what did he tell us to do?
Love God, love people.
Where is it?
Seek and save the lost.
Yes.
Yeah, who are you seeking? Some of those people you need to seek are very uncomfortable to be around. Who are you seeking? Have you ever been around people who stink? Who don't bathe? People who are in the throes of addiction, dependency, the homeless. You know, some people really have ability to reach out to people like that are destitute. But what about even just the people around us? Who are we seeking out? Who are we inviting to come to church? Where are the children? Can we get more children, more families? Where are those families? Where's mom and dad? Do you see what I mean? Well, dad is an alcoholic. Well, maybe this is right where dad needs to be. So we've got his 4 kids. Let's get dad here, right? We need to keep on track with what we're supposed to be doing. Some of the people who are the hardest to get along with are the ones we most need to reach out to. They're the ones that are isolated themselves. They're depressed. They're sitting in their trailer, not doing nothing and not willing to do anything. I'm just saying we've got to be doing that work. We've got to be reaching the people. And we can use this tool to reach some people. And we could use the Keams Canyon facility to reach some people. But a lot of times we don't need a place. We just need to reach out to people. So that's the goal. And I don't care how fancy the place is, if you can get the people in. If we could make this place real fancy and people would come in, I'd say, okay, get them in. Right? Let's make that pillar gold and see if people come to look at our gold pillar. And while they're looking at the gold pillar, let's talk to them about Christ. If we keep our mission or our purpose clear, and I think Solomon's purpose is pretty clear. He's establishing God as Jehovah God of this nation Israel. He's establishing that as a real God with them following after him. I see that in him. But the sin that he's got going on is gonna get him. We're gonna see it on the next chapter. We're gonna start seeing it fall apart. So, any other questions or comments anybody has?
If you compare Judaism with Christianity.
Someone want to open the door for her? It looks like she's trying to get in.
They built a temple for the nation of Israel, basically. And it was for their people. It was very, where we're international, Christians are, and we're the temple. The building doesn't really matter, right? I mean, it tells us that in, Ephesians and Corinthians, several places. So, they got the focus wrong. Of course, that was for them, for the Jews. They were special. They had their priests, they had their ministries, they had everything all lined out for them. But in the Christian movement, it's all about the others, getting other people in, not just, they were very, you had to be in the outer court if you weren't Jewish. You had to be.
Yeah, but I'm still thinking about what you said about we are the temples of God.
So we're supposed to be busy building up our temple, making it as beautiful as possible to the Lord, right? No, not on the outside.
But yes.
A magnet to draw them to us.
Yes.
If we're the temple of God, we should be a magnet that's drawing them to us.
What would draw people to us? What draws people?
Love.
Love, joy, peace is kind of good.
L-O-V-E. Wow.
But how do you love? So how do I love you? What do we do that draws people that makes people know that we love them? What can we do?
A lot of times,
Kindness, patience.
when somebody's going through a bad time in their life, they start looking for other ways to be. And that's kind of an open.
And open the door.
When they're having trouble, if we're there to listen, if we're there to help, that might be an opening, because they're reevaluating what they're doing and how things are going for them, and they're maybe ready to make a change.
Have you noticed how people open up to you when you look them in the eyes? Like if you just look at them and you just gaze and, you say good morning, Eve, but you just keep looking right in her eyes. It's funny how you don't have to say much more than that, but a conversation will start.
Well, I was looking at, again, The Chosen last night, season 3, I guess it was 5 or 6, but anyway, it was talking about Jesus when Jairus came to get him for his dying daughter, and he stopped and with the bleeding woman. And it struck me then, and we're going to study this in the study that I'm getting ready to start. And so it's like, how do you know that someone cares? And she knew that Jesus cared because he stayed there instead of going to Jairus' daughter. He was taking care of that, but he listened to her. So it goes along with what Vern was saying, people are going through a bad time, and you can see this in people, I think, sometimes. Not everybody's good at everything, but somebody you can tell that just needs to maybe say another word or two. Maybe that's when you need to stay there with them and just listen to them. And they're going to remember that. They're going to remember that you listened.
That's
that
true.
You were there for them. And when, this is kind of the same thing before I became a Christian, I didn't want my neighbor talking to me about God. She would have just pushed me away. But when God and the Holy Spirit moved me, she's the first place I went to.
That's interesting.
But I think that the church as a whole here is progressing and getting more members. You see more and more churches coming here. So I think we're moving more and more to getting people to come to church. So I think that in our respect, some of us are working at it, or some people are working hard at it.
Reaching out to people, inviting them. John?
I think that's the secret to it.
Yes, it is.
I don't think you necessarily have to reach the poor and destitute either, because there's a lot of people that are well situated that also need it.
Yeah. It doesn't really matter whether you're poor or not, right?
That's right.
John?
I've always said people know that you love them if you spend some time with them and looking them in the face and talking to them. People know if you care about them and they'll listen to them.
Yeah, if you really want a scary experience, pray for it. Because God will send someone across your path and you'll go, ooh, I didn't mean that. People have some pretty hard things going on in their lives when they begin to share some of the hardships that are happening. It can really be a pull on you and your faith, which is probably a good thing. That's how we grow, right? Grow and learn and connect with people. So, yes.
I have a brother that came down here from the big city of Portland, and he said, well, his wife then came down afterwards, and he'd say hi to somebody when he was walking by, or they'd wave. And she said, do you know them? No. Well, then why are we doing that? Because that's how these people live. Mm-hmm. They act like they care about me. And in the big city, you're lucky to get anybody to even get out of your way if they're standing in. But here, it's altogether different. So we do have love in the community.
Mm-hmm. We need to stop and take a moment, spend time with people, even people that might smell bad, or people that might be quite a bit younger than us or quite a bit older. Stinky people are a weakness for me. I have a hard time. But everybody has their things that are unique with them, and we have to get past those things so that we can introduce them to Christ. And that's the ultimate thing, isn't it? So.
Well, sometimes it's surprising which people are stinky.
I guess so. I don't know.
It just comes to my mind. A couple decades ago, my wife and I were tourists for a couple days down in Bisbee, and we went into some of the art galleries and stuff, and we were admiring the photography of a guy who definitely was a very talented photographer, and been out taking landscape and pictures of Indian paintings and such out in the remote deserts of Mexico and southwestern United States, and goodness, but you didn't want to be within 2 or 3 feet of that guy because it reeked. and he had his gallery there, and his, and we actually bought a little piece of work with him from him, but
Couldn't
but it
stand
was
too long.
just, oh gosh, and I thought, oh, goodness. Of course, I didn't tell him anything. Somebody better tell him.
Well, let's pray.
Yeah.
Father, thank you so much for giving us your word and giving us examples like Solomon and the people of Israel. I pray, Lord, that we might be sensitive to people around us, that you might draw them in and talk with them and help people to come to a saving knowledge of you. And thank you for giving us a facility that we can use for your purposes, and it's so functional and so easy for us to use and to share with the community. And I pray, Lord, that we continue to draw people toward you. It's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen.
Speaking of Steve,
Yeah.
I think I'm gonna go into